Hey there! Today I'm going to show you the totem method for mushroom cultivation. And the totem method you can use for oyster and lion's mane mushrooms. And the species of wood you use can vary. For oyster, soft maples are ideal, such as box elder, which is usually considered a weed tree. Poplar has also worked. Field and forest is the place to get the spawn, and they're the people I ask all of my questions, pretty much, and they told me that oak is not great for oyster, but oak is good for lion's mane, especially red oak. Red oak is the traditional species for lion's mane, and but people are experimenting with sugar maple and silver maple are also good ones, and you can still use box elder. It's everywhere in my land, so that's what I'm using. I also have, this is box elder right here. It's got the red heart. And here's some poplar that I'm also using for oyster mushrooms. And you can see that I have them stacked off the ground, and I am just drying them out for 1 to 2 weeks before I start the process. And you can have them in the shade, is fine. I wouldn't put them in full sun. And the reason that I am waiting 1 to 2 weeks is because I actually cut these pretty late in the season. Right now it's May. And so I believe that if you cut the trees while they're dormant, which is ideal, then you can wait quite a long time, months before inoculating the logs. But I still have spawn, and even though it's late, it's still going to work. The main 2 reasons why you're supposed to cut during the dormant season. The main reason is because the bark comes off more easily the later in the season you get. Here it seems pretty intact. You can, I guess this section of poplar, you know, the bark's coming off, but I'm gonna saw that off there. And the other main reason, oh, it is coming off a little bit here, so maybe I'll saw off this little section. The other reason is because the sugar content is higher in the dormant season in the trunk, but that's not a big deal. So essentially you select long straight sections. I think you can even start with like 8-inch sections and go up to, like, I've heard 18 inches. And for oyster, you want to make sure you have enough sapwood here. Lion's mane actually will eat the heartwood, but oyster will not. So you don't want to have huge sections for oyster with a lot of heartwood. You want to have some sapwood in there. One question I had was, how can you tell that the moisture content is 30%? Well, the short answer is, unless you weigh the logs before and after you cut them, you can't really tell. But if you cut them the day of and you can like feel sort of how moist it is, I have like a general idea. It's actually been raining, and I didn't cut them up 1 to 2 weeks ago. I'm not actually positive if you're supposed to cut them the day of or 1 to 2 weeks beforehand. I've heard both. So yeah, just get a general idea, but it'd be fine if you're using them fresh. And just make sure, you know, that most of the bark is intact. If there's like a big area of bark missing, you might want to cut that off or use a different log. There are various methods you can use, but what I'm doing right now is I'm pre-sawing these. I'm trying to make the cuts pretty straight, and so I have 2 1-foot sections and then a little cap. Instead of a cap, you can actually use newspaper. You could probably use cardboard or paper bags. It's essentially to hold in the spawn at the top, hold in the moisture, which we'll see in a moment. The first step is to make sure the ground is level where you're going to place the log, which seems pretty simple. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I've learned from experience that if it's not level and if you didn't make a great cut, then your log kind of tips and the spawn doesn't have contact with the wood and loses some moisture. So that's the first step. Second step, put a piece of like a supermarket bag, brand down, and or cardboard. I think you can use newspaper. I think you want to make sure it's not like dirty or been on the ground for a long time. Then you simply take a handful of spawn and place it, maybe a few handfuls. You basically want it to be like 1/4 to 1/8 inch in depth. And then, so just like the diameter of the log. And 1 bag of sawdust spawn from Field and Forest should give you 12 totems with 2 feet each. Or sorry, 6 totems with 2 feet each, so 12 feet total. I'm just going to simply lower the log onto the spawn and make sure it feels secure. I might move it around a bit just to make sure it's level. And then I've gotten smart and made a little mark on where I was making the cut so that I can line them up easily, because sometimes your log isn't perfectly round. And so if you don't have the log lined up to how it was before it was cut, it kind of it doesn't balance very well. So this is oyster, Pohu oyster, and so I'm just going to do this and place the second section on there. So after your second section's on there, we just place more on the top edge, and then we'll place the cap. Or if you don't have a cap or don't have enough wood, you can actually just use newspaper to secure the spawn on the top. And then I've actually just been using tiny little nails to secure the newspaper. I wonder if you can use like a brick or something. But a lot of people say if you use a cap, which I'm going to do, you want to put a nail through it to hold it in place. I have a pretty fat cap, so I'm actually not going to nail anything down there. It seems pretty well secured. And then I labeled it. Make sure you label the type of mushroom and then the type of wood, and I'm also marking the date and how long it's been since I cut the tree for future information. So essentially the last step is just to put this lawn contractor bag over the top and kind of make sure it's secure at the bottom. You can put rocks over it at the bottom. And here's my finished totems. And notice that I have them under some shade cloth that I made with burlap sack. And you want to make sure that it still has a lot of airflow. It's moist. It's fairly warm. So I have it actually resting over, the shade cloth resting over a box elder. And I'm not using plastic bags because I don't want to just use a bunch of plastic. I think long bags should also be just as good. And that's pretty much it. You want to make sure that they get moisture. If they're in the bags, you don't really need to water them. But if it's been really dry, you might want to give them a squirt. And then it takes about 1 year for the logs to go through their incubation period. I know for shiitake logs or for stacking logs, like you see over there, you can check the ends to see if they're white after a year. And I think the incubation for oyster is about 6 months to a year, but for lion's mane, be patient, it can be up to 3 years. So that's pretty much it. Thank you.